Okay, so let's talk about Heterodox Academy, because you set that up, this organization that you should tell everybody about in precisely to deal with this issue. And so I'd like to know about it, how it's growing, what it's doing, what your aims are, all of that.
Yeah. So I gave this talk in 2011 laying out the fact that we have no more conservatives in social psychology and why this makes it hard for us to find truth. And in the months after that, a few social psychologists resonated with the message. They said, wow, I think you're right. I have some data on this. So the five of us, or six of us, wrote this paper. It came out in Behavioral and Brain Sciences. Charlotta Stern, I'm sorry, was the sixth one that I forgot to add in before. We got this paper published in Behavioral and Brain Sciences. It came out, it was sort of online in 2014, but it came out for good in the summer of 2015, which coincidentally was the same summer that my article came out with Greg Lukianoff called Coddling the American Mind. That was about things going on with undergrads. But our concern was entirely faculty. It was just the nature of the academic community, the research community. So we got these two things going on, summer of 2015. And then that summer I hear from Nick Rosencrantz, a law professor, who says we have the same problem in law. And
might even be worse in law. Well, it's really bad in Canada in law.
Okay, because, and as he points out, we're training all these students, they never meet a conservative, then they have to go argue cases in front of judges, half of whom were appointed by Republicans. They have no idea what a conservative thinks. This is malpractice. We got to train it. So, and I hear from a sociologist, Chris Martin, same thing in sociology. So the three of us said, hey, you know, this is a big problem for the whole academy.
Have you looked at faculties of education?
Oh my God, those are the worst. By worst, I don't know the numbers, but in terms of the vindictiveness, the pressure put on any non-conforming opinion, my impression, I don't have data, but my impression from the letters I get is that education schools and social work schools are the worst.
That's exactly in keeping with my understanding as well. It's hard to tell which of those two are worst. I would say it's the faculties of education because they have a direct pipeline to kids.
Oh, in terms of their effects, yes, far more pernicious. Yeah, that's right.
But equally warped, let's say, but more pernicious. Right. And the things that are happening in the Canadian education system as a consequence of that are so reprehensible. It's
and we should get to
belief.
that because it's happening here too with these ideas filtering down to high school. I've been so focused on college, now we're discovering the problem is actually baked in. The illiberal attitudes are often baked in by the time they arrive.
Yes, and purposefully, like in Canada, increasingly, the radical leftists have control over curriculum development, and they're starting to develop social justice curriculums, which is what they call them for kindergarten kids. Yeah, that's right. So really...
So let's finish up with Heterodox Academy, and then we'll get back to the earlier grades. So originally 3 of us decided to put up a website. I invited all the other authors from the BBS paper. We invited a few other people who were working on this. And so for the first year, we had this project. It was called heterodoxacademy.org. We put the site up on about September 10th, I think it was, of 2015. And it was just a community of researchers who are studying the problem of the lack of viewpoint diversity. Well, 5 days later, the protests start at Missouri. So these are racially motivated protests or protests about racial insensitivity and racial problems at Missouri. And at first it seemed like this is just a Missouri problem, but coming in the wake, of course, of Ferguson and all the videos we saw of unarmed black men being killed by police, a lot of these concerns spread to other universities. The protests aren't just about race, but it was that fall of 2015, especially the Yale protest, when the president of Yale validates their narrative that Yale is a racist place, we have to reform Yale, then it spreads nationally. And now suddenly this is not just a faculty issue anymore. So even though at Heterodox Academy we're mostly focused on the faculty, we're now seeing it's a complex ecosystem with all kinds of forces acting on universities, so that between 2015 and 2017, the danger of speaking honestly about what you think about an academic or intellectual proposition has skyrocketed. The risk of being mobbed, ostracized, formally investigated.
By Title IX people, for example.
By Title IX people. We're sitting here at NYU. Go to any bathroom. I'll show you on this floor. Go to any bathroom. There's a sign telling students exactly what number to call to report you or me if we say something that someone takes to be a bias act.
Oh, so you have bias investigation teams here.
That's right.
See, we haven't got to that particular point in Canada yet. So I think we're farther ahead down that path in some ways, but not quite as far in others. So yeah, that's really unbelievable.
So things are changing very, very fast. It's not at all schools, but then again, things are changing so fast we don't really know. We don't have good data on what's going on. What I can tell you though is that at Heterodox Academy, when we started out in 2015, there was a lot of suspicion. A lot of people on the left were afraid, like, oh, is this some right-wing group? Now, very few of us are actually on the right, but because we end up mostly speaking up for libertarians and conservatives who are attacked or silenced, people will think, oh, we must be right-wing, but we're not. I mean, I've never voted for a Republican in my life. I've never given money to a Republican campaign. I'm now increasingly calling myself a liberal now that we see illiberalism flourishing. So when we started out, there was a lot of suspicion of us from many professors. But now that it's clear that the problems, these are not just a few anecdotes. This is the new normal.
And it's not just in the universities, as you pointed out.
That's right.
It's spreading
it's
like
spreading,
mad.
And it's not just in the U.S. It spread in 2015. I thought it was a uniquely American problem.
Yeah.
But boy, it's in Canada and the U.K.
Yeah. And Australia and New Zealand.
That's right. It is a uniquely Anglosphere problem. This is really interesting. It's not on the continent very much at all.
What about in the Nordic countries?
No. I mean, they have, so political correctness, you have lots of places. The unique thing that identifies this new culture is linking the political correctness with the sense of fragility. And this is something America has pioneered. The idea that, in Britain, they've always had a no platforming, they call it. So if there's and there was an actual British National Party, some actual fascist party. So if a BNP member is going to speak on campus, you mob him, you shut it down. Don't give him a platform. So, you've had passionate politics, certainly since the 60s. So that's not new, and that's everywhere. What's new is the American idea that if someone says something, and it could be a sincerely expressed idea, not a racist rant, just like, well, I don't know, I think that maybe hormones do affect gendered behavior. Can you say that? Well, what if someone takes that as somehow essentializing gender and then saying that women are inferior or whatever? If they,
yes, well, that happened to James Damore, for example.
Exactly. So that's what's new, is the idea that if someone says something that a member of a protected or marginalized group is offended by, that person is harmed. And if that person is harmed, we must protect that person. And more ominously, just in the last year or two, it's not just that they're harmed, they're suffering, it's that this was violence.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Violence.
Yeah, well, that's part of the postmodern narrative that
and this
attributes everything to power.
This is so dangerous, the crossing the line into violence. It just occurred to me just like yesterday, I was thinking about this. Wait, the state is supposed to have a monopoly on violence, right? But if speech, especially his speech and her speech and the speech of those people in that academic movement or on that, if their speech is violence, well, the state is supposed to have a monopoly on their speech then. And if it's violence, well, then we have a right to use violence back. The state doesn't have a monopoly on our violence because our violence is, is morally motivated. So just the Orwellian and authoritarian implications of this move, once you say that speech is violence, you're unlocking, you're opening Pandora's box. I mean, you're 5 steps down the road to hell. And I'd say we're about 7 steps down the road to hell.
So you're that concerned about it. Okay, so now tell me how many members, if you don't have to discuss any of this obviously, but how many members of Heterodox Academy are there now?
We have 1,300 members. So once we opened up, so originally it was just for researchers who were studying this problem, but we had lots of people wanting to join. And so we said, well, okay, why not? And so we just said, all right, as long as you're a professor, that is, you have a PhD, you're living more or less the life of a professor, you have a university affiliation. So we now take adjuncts if they have a PhD, we take postdocs. Basically, if you're in the guild, if you're living the life of a professor, and you're concerned about the rise of intimidation, frankly, if you're concerned that our wonderful institution, I love being a professor, I love the academy, and I feel like it's not just losing public respect, it's losing its ability to function, it's losing its ability to teach and do research on politicized topics. So,
and there are more politicized topics all the time.
That's right. And there are a few in the natural sciences, not many, but there are some in the natural sciences as well. Anyway, my point is, we're now growing very rapidly, and something I'm very excited by is, since we've started having more violence on campus, beginning with Berkeley and Middlebury, we're seeing a pervasive sense among people on the left that there really is this problem here, that something has to be done. And so we are finding much more acceptance now from professors on the left. So I like to think about there's the liberal left, which is the great majority, and there's the illiberal left,
We did a factor analysis of politically correct beliefs and found exactly that, and that the illiberal left was also high in orderliness.
That's interesting. That's the authoritarian predisposition.
Yeah. And also kind of markedly declined, was also characterized by a marked lack of verbal intelligence.
Oh, that's interesting.
So yeah, it was the correlation was about 0.4.
Well, that's beautiful. That's beautiful, because one of the simplest formulations I've heard, a really great formulation from Mark Lilla. So Mark Lilla wrote this fantastic op-ed in the New York Times week after Trump was elected, saying identity politics is a really foolish thing to do. It pushes lots of people over to Trump's side. Identity politics is part of the problem. Well, he writes this op-ed, and one of his fellow professors at Columbia, I forget how she does it, but she basically says something about the mask with eye holes falls from his face, like he's a Ku Klux Klan member or something like that. And so Lilla, who is in the humanities, he's an intellectual historian, Lilla has this simple formulation. He says, that's a slur, not an argument. And once I had that simple formulation, I realized, wow, that's almost all the pushback I've ever gotten. It's somehow, you're winking at Nazis, or you're
that's happened to me over and over.
Yeah.
My neighborhood was just postered with.
I saw that. Again, the intimidation. So this is really key. We're supposed to be all about, you can say anything you want, you can make any argument you want, if you can support it, if you can back it with reasons. This is critical thinking. This is what we're supposed to train our students to do.
Well, and it's not only that you can say anything, but you can say it, there's a boundary on that, which especially if you're a scientist, less so in the humanities, but if you're a scientist, the things you say have to be vetted by people who are going to be critical of them, right? So not only can you say something, that's right, there's accountability built into it.
That's right. So I didn't mean to say you can say whatever you want like a racist rant. I mean, you can put forth any idea you want if you can back it up. What we're seeing with anything politicized is it's not about backing it up. Students are learning rhetorical techniques to link their enemies to something racist, sexist, homophobic.
Something contemptible, something contaminating.
Disgusting.
Yeah,
That's
you
right.
bet.
Exactly.
And those are the things that are not only worthy of being destroyed, but that you have a moral duty to destroy.
Exactly.
So
that's right. So it's almost like the immune system. I forget how exactly it works, but there's some cell that tags a cell as enemy, enemy, and once that tag is put on the cell, that attracts other, I forget what kind of cell, to mob it. And so we should look into this metaphor of the immune system.
Yeah.
Because once you're labeled as a racist, students don't have to read you, that it doesn't matter what you actually say, you will now be attacked on campus.
It's also, too, that once you're labeled that way, if someone defends you, the label is contagious, right?
That's right.
In
And
exactly
that's the dynamic
the same
of
manner.
a witch hunt. That's how we know we're in this super religious territory of witch hunts, that if you stand up for someone, you are tagged, and then you will be mobbed.
Right,
and that's why
an
there's
infectious
so much
disease.
Exactly, and that's why there's so much cowardice on campus among both students and faculty. People are afraid to stand up. Even if the majority think that what's going on is nuts or is unfair, they're afraid to stand up. And that's in part due to social media, because it's just, students today have been raised with various platforms that make it easy for people to join in, attack someone. They look at who liked what. So if in that article we just saw on Reed, there was a bit of a counter-revolution at Reed. Yeah. The students had to get together somehow and decide, should I like that post? How about if we all like it at the same time? Then we'll get in less trouble. Okay,
so to what degree, so let's talk about the aims of the Heterodox Academy. So you've brought people together who are in principle interested in a diversity of opinions. And but in what manner is that going to be utilized to I don't want to use the word combat, but to deal with this emergent problem of ideological rigidity in the universities?
Yeah. So two useful concepts here. One is the emperor's new clothes. We all know that story. Even if everybody sees this is nuts, the emperor's walking around with no clothes, they're afraid to say it until one person says it. So, and this is also the Ash experiment. Everybody says that line is the same as that line. It's obviously not true. If one person says the truth, then nobody conforms after that. Right. So the mere presence of a group of people who say, you know what, we actually need a diversity of opinions. And the fact that on our site we'll publish things. So sometimes when professors are mobbed, like when Brett Weinstein was mobbed, so I wrote an essay that stood up for him. We've done that for some of them. It's happening so fast, I can't keep up. I've got books to write, and every week there's some new member who's getting mobbed. And so we're going to develop a team of people who will write. But just knowing that there are people who will stand up for you, knowing that there are people who will say, wait a second, this is not what we do in the academy. So that's one thing, is we just stand up for each other. Two is we develop products that we think can basically fix the situation. So one of our products is called the Campus Expression Survey. It's a survey designed to actually measure who was afraid of speaking up, about what topics, and why. What are they afraid of? And it turns out everyone's afraid of the students more than the faculty. They're afraid mostly to talk about race.
What about the administrators?
Everyone's afraid of the students. They're afraid of the students.
Oh, so okay,
I don't have. We have not surveyed them. I've only surveyed students. I don't.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
But from what we hear, people are afraid of the students.
Well,
showing
that's
up on your
also
doorstep.
appalling in its own manner. Like, was that
It's a
Reed
failure of leadership,
where
yeah.
that's for sure? They let those kids come into the classroom, the actual classroom, and disrupt a class on an ongoing basis.
Right.
I mean,
For months.
yes, and I couldn't understand that exactly. I mean, my response to that would be, first, I would tell them to leave. Second, I would call campus security. Third, if something wasn't done about it, I just wouldn't teach the class. So I don't understand, like, it seems to me that it's also up to individual professors to draw a line, which is that if you're being intimidated by students, why do you show up and teach the class? I don't understand that.
Yeah.
So
Again, people are afraid to stand up if it means that people will call you a racist.
yeah, but God,
That's
I mean, it's weird in that situation though,
That's
because
right. It's carried to
you're
an
also afraid to go to your class.
That's right.
You know, and there's a much more proximal threat
That's right.
there.
So that's what I mean. That's what I'm most alarmed by, is the rise of intimidation. Intimidation is now a factor in many aspects of academic life, and that's just terrible. That's completely incompatible with what we do and who we are.
Well, it's especially appalling given that whatever happens in the university campuses, you know, like one of the questions I've faced in Canada is, well, why should we care about what's happening in the Ivy Towers?
Because you're going to hire these people next year.
You are, well, yeah, well, there it's the hard, like what's happening in the campuses is going to happen in society in 5 years.
That's right. It's
That's
already
how
happened.
it goes.
It's already happened. So this is actually an important point. I just gave a talk at a big law firm here in New York, where they're very devoted to diversity, but they're doing it right. They're really thinking about diversity, like why is diversity good? And so they have a whole month on viewpoint diversity, which is just fantastic. And what I'm learning from talking to a number of people in the business world is that in the last year, there are now all these pressures on leaders to endorse this, condemn that, sign this open letter.
Most of that's coming in through human resources.
That's right. That's right. But it's the same dynamic we have on campus. And the answer to it, so if anybody watching here, if you run a business, if you have friends who are in business, I think there are only two stable equilibria. One is that every organization is just either all right-wing or all left-wing, but that would be disastrous. So either you just say, okay, we're on one side. That would be terrible. The other is what we call the Chicago Principles of Free Expression. The University of Chicago has the best statement out there on how the university provides a platform on which multiple views can contest. The university does not take anyone's side. That's the only other stable alternative. Right. And I think leaders need to do this in business, certainly at universities. So we're encouraging every university to adopt the Chicago Principles, because a lot of what mass action is an attempt to compel the authority to come in on your side and punish your enemies.
Yeah.
And so that has to stop.
So how effectively is the Chicago Statement how effectively is the Chicago Statement being disseminated? How rapidly are universities signing up?
There a few signed on early in this whole crisis. Purdue, there are about 10 or 15 that have endorsed it or something like it. It's not enough to just endorse something, but if you have leadership that's committed to creating an open platform in which people can disagree, one thing that's very encouraging, I've been invited by a number of university presidents to come speak. We have all kinds of innovations at Heterodox Academy to foster a more inclusive climate in which people can actually engage with difference. There's a lot of interest. So I think the university leaders were very slow to react. They didn't want to alienate certain factions of students, but they're almost all reasonable people. Mm-hmm. They're almost all liberal left, not illiberal. Yeah. They're horrified by what's going on. They know they're sitting atop a powder keg. They don't want things to blow up in their face, as happened at Evergreen. So this brings us to our another product, the one that we're most excited by. So it just went online today. It's called the Open Mind Platform. If you go to openmindplatform.org, you can find, we've developed an app. We have a whole library of readings and videos. We've developed an app that guides you through. We don't just say, here's how to engage with different viewpoints. We start by saying, why is it good? And we make the case that you need this. Everybody needs this. And two, we remind people that we're all basically self-righteous hypocrites. We have quotes from wisdom traditions around the world, and we've all heard this. So just a little bit of, you can call it emotional manipulation if you like, but just get people into a mindset in which they're willing to say, oh yeah, whoa, calm down. We're all too self-righteous here. And then we teach them some psychology about motivated reasoning. And only then do we teach them to engage with views that are not their own. So we've already run this in about 15 or 20 classes. The results so far look promising, that at the end of it, the measures show that students are more open to other ideas. So the Open Mind platform, we think, is a tool that we think a lot of universities are going to adopt. There's a lot of interest in it. And if there's leadership, if the professors generally do support viewpoint diversity and open inquiry, if we change freshman orientation so that students are trained first and foremost in how to step back, give people the benefit of the doubt, be open-minded. If we do that first.
That's like behavioral exposure to some degree, right? The idea would be that if you're afraid or disgusted by something that you don't understand, the appropriate first of all, the treatment is necessary because otherwise you'll isolate yourself in the ways that you already described. And second, that brief exposure, voluntary exposure is going to be the best curative.
Exactly. That's right.
That's the opposite of the safe space idea,
exactly.
where you need to be protected.
That's right. The safe space idea is the worst thing you could possibly do for the very people you're trying to protect.
Exactly.
I mean, the psychology behind safe spaces and microaggressions is just the exact opposite of what we should be doing if we want to create kids, especially black kids, gay kids, women, whatever. If you think that they are vulnerable to more stigma, more conflict, if you think that they are vulnerable, that's especially when a safe space will be temporarily pleasant, but in the long run bad for them.
Right, and that's the critical issue too with regards to safe spaces, is that they're sacrificing the medium and long term of the students' well-being, let's say, to the short-term lack of fear and conflict. They're infantilizing them essentially.
That's exactly.
So, yeah, okay. So, all right, so I was thinking about the discussion idea. I've got a personality test online now that's based on this Big 5 aspect scale, but it might be interesting as something for us to think about, to find people who are high in openness and low in conscientiousness or orderliness, and offer them the opportunity to engage in dialogue with people who have the opposite personality traits. Because, well, first of all, because they're going to run into people like that always, right? And maybe even establish a relationship with them inadvertently. And so being able to tolerate that might give them the kind of insight that you said you developed when you realized that the conservative ethos was based on a reasonable but not complete set of beneficial axiomatic presuppositions. So, all right. So now this has pretty much taken over your life, this Heterodox Academy, as well as the writing. Now you're writing a couple of new books, I understand.
Yeah. So I was in the psychology department at the University of Virginia for 17 years. And when my book, The Righteous Mind, was coming out, I wanted to move to New York City for a year so I could do promotional work for it. And I just had, my second child was just born, and I knew it would be hard to fly from Charlottesville. So I just happened to get a temporary position here at Stern, at the business school. And when I first arrived, I wasn't that interested in business. But as soon as I got here, Occupy Wall Street happened, and suddenly it was like everyone's talking about morality and politics and capitalism and business. And then I started learning about the history of capitalism, and I knew nothing about it. It was fascinating. And I started seeing how free enterprise and free markets have helped raise living standards around the world,
yes.
Radical decline of poverty.
In a staggeringly rapid fashion that's completely unprecedented, especially since the year 2000.
That's right. So here I was, 48 years old, discovering I knew nothing about, it was like when I first learned about evolution, like, wow, this explains like everything in the natural world. And learning about capitalism, business, explained everything about the built world and the world that we actually live in. And there was also all these business scandals. This was 2011, in the wake of the financial crisis. And I saw a huge opening to begin applying moral psychology to help corporations have better ethics. So everything I do involves applying moral psychology to help complex systems work better. So I'd been focused on political polarization and governance for years before then, and that led to The Righteous Mind. And then I got here to Stern. They offered me a job during that first year, and I took it, and it's been fantastic. It's been really exciting. It's like a whole new, almost like being back in grad school, a whole bunch of new things to learn.
It must be a kind of a shock, an existential shock to be in a business school in some sense.
No, it's not. It's not a shock. I mean, it's a different culture. It's much more open in the sense that it's so diverse, like the things people are doing. There's not like a way that we do things here, and it's much more open to applied projects, to actually having an
to
impact
applied
on the world.
projects, yeah.
And so it was a perfect time for me. Like I just, The Righteous Mind, that wraps up like the first half of my career. Like everything I did is in that book. And now it's time for something new. And that new thing was going to be looking at how morality or moral psychology both underlines or is the foundation for our ability to do capitalism, like contracts, reciprocity, all sorts of things, and how our left-right divide from The Righteous Mind makes it hard for us to figure out what's true. Like if you raise the minimum wage, does that help or hurt the working poor?
Right.
If you're an economist on the left, it obviously helps them. If you're an economist on the right, it obviously hurts them because fewer of them have jobs.
And you can gerrymander the measurement devices to produce the conclusions that you want, which is a big problem.
That's right. So I'm supposed to be writing a book called 3 Stories About Capitalism, The Moral Psychology of Economic Life. And so I started traveling around the world, looking at how development is going in various countries. I did a 3-month trip to Asia in 2015. I came back from Asia. My article came out with Lukianoff, The Coddling the American Mind. The BBS article was published. And I thought, okay, now I can get back to this, keep writing this capitalism book. And then the universities kind of began melting down in the fall. And then we started Heterodox Academy. And so, yes, it has taken over my life. It's basically a full-time job in addition to trying to write I'm also working on so Lukianoff and I didn't want to turn our article into a book because we thought we'd said everything. But man, have things been happening fast. And we've learned so much more since we wrote that article.
And you wrote that article when? How long ago?
Well, we wrote it in late 2014, and then we edited it in early 2015, and it finally came out in August of 2015. And so in last October, Greg wrote to me and said, John, I think I do want to turn the article into a book because we know so much more now, and the problem is so much more serious than it was. And the evidence, my God, the evidence about the mental health crisis of adolescence. When Greg and I wrote the article, we saw lots of hints that depression and anxiety were going way up.
Yeah.
And we think that's related to the overprotection.
Yeah, let's talk about that just for a second, then go back to the book. So I've got a potential demographic explanation for that in part. Well, and I don't know if you guys have looked into this or not. Well, there's 2 things that I think might be contributing to it. One is 2 or 3 things. One is the average age at which children are, the average age at which people have children has gone way up.
That's true. Okay, so why does that matter?
Well, because I think people get more conservative and cautious as they get older.
A little bit, but true, but it's a very small effect.
Okay.
And it's, wait a second,
okay.
It's the having of the kids, which is what makes them more conservative. When you have kids, you are more threat sensitive, you're more likely to vote for the right-wing party. So just delaying childbirth wouldn't.
Okay, what about fewer siblings?
That would, yes, that's part of it. And this is what we're seeing in Asia too. When you have a lot of kids, you're not quite as worried. You don't have all your eggs in one basket.
Well, and you can't be quite as worried, and the siblings raise each other.
That's right.
Right, and then there's a lot of
and they
dominance
fight a lot
hierarchies.
more.
Right,
That's
they
right. They
play
have a lot
and
more,
fight.
Exactly. It's the free play and the fighting, the working things out for themselves. Those are essential skills of adulthood.
Okay, so then, all right, so we could
so
also
smaller
develop,
family size is part of it. I do agree.
Well, and then also what's happening increasingly in schools is that kids aren't allowed free play, and they're certainly not allowed rough and tumble free play.
Exactly. That's right. That's one of the biggest things of all. So there are 3 giant. There are a lot of causes. I mean, this is actually it's a really fun puzzle because it's like the biggest social science puzzle of our age. What is happening that's making so many of our systems go haywire? And I'm focusing on the universities. The big 3, I would say, are one is the loss of unsupervised free play.
Yeah. Okay.
And Peter Gray has been brilliant on this. He's at Boston College, showing how even among young animals, they have to practice the skills for adulthood.
Yeah.
And getting in conflict.
Pegsat's shown that too.
Exactly. So getting in conflicts and then dealing with it, and sometimes losing, and you come back. Having a game in which there's a problem, but you have to work it out or the game stops. That's what kids always did.
Yeah.
It's only recently, in the beginning of the 90s, that they're always supervised because we're afraid if we take our eyes off them, they'll be kidnapped. And that was never a risk. It was never a risk.
You know, I've kind of wondered about this gender flexibility issue as a form of delayed fantasy play.
Oh, you're getting Freudian on me. Go ahead.
Well,
How does this one work?
because it looks to me like that is, you know, when kids are little and 3 and 4, say 3 to 7, they do a tremendous amount of identity play. You know, they pretend they're animals. They pretend they're parents. They pretend they're girls if they're boys. They pretend they're boys if they're girls. Like, they really do a tremendous amount of identity play.
Right.
And one of the things that's been really puzzling me is, well, what happens if that isn't, if they never have an opportunity for that because they're not engaging in fantasy play? Maybe it's just delayed till adulthood.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, because play, it's almost impossible to overstate the importance of that rough and tumble play, and then the fantasy play that enables you to adopt different identities, and then the negotiated games that you talked about that enable people to handle both victory, but even more importantly, loss.
That's right.
So
no, that's plausible. That could well be. I have no opinion on. But the big three factors that I think are explain part of what's happening on campus are: one, the loss of the unsupervised play, so that the kids there's always an adult present, and so they come to college and they expect there to be an adult or dean somebody if there's a conflict. That's one. Two is social media, which hit just as iGen, internet generation. This is Jean Twenge's work. You know, we used to think that the millennial generation ends in 1998 or 2000, but Jean Twenge shows, looking at 4 large data sets, that birth year 1995, kids born in 1995 and after are really different. Their values are different. They have much higher rates of anxiety and depression, especially the girls. Boys have gone up, girls have gone way up. And the reason seems to be that Facebook lowered its age. So in 2005, you had to be a college student at a certain number of colleges to get Facebook. In 2006, you could be any 11-year-old who lies and says that she's 13 and you've got a Facebook account. But then you're using it on your parents' PC. And in 2007, the iPhone comes out, and it saturates the market faster than any consumer product ever has. So by 2010 or 11, a lot of adolescents have Facebook and other social platforms. And this is just devastating, especially to girls, because it's not texting. Texting is just me to you, you know, that's back and forth. That's fine. That, you know, when we were kids, you called your friends on the phone. That's fine. The problem seems to be, according to Twenge, it's especially platforms in which you put something out and then you wait and see what everyone says about it. And that especially is damaging to girls who already are at risk of eating disorders and image disorders.
Okay. So girls become more susceptible to negative emotion when they hit puberty.
Well, yes, that's right. That's always been the case.
But then there's another issue too with regards to female aggression. So, you know, it's clearly the case that males are more likely to be physically damaging / aggressive than females are. But what females use is reputation savaging.
That's right. So that's Nikki Crick's work. Nikki Crick passed away a couple years ago, showed that if you add it all up, boys and girls are equally aggressive. But the boys' aggression is more physical, the girls' is more relational. So if you imagine a bunch of 13, 14-year-olds in their middle schools, and then you parachute in a whole bunch of iPhones, everybody's got one in their pocket.
It's an amplifier.
What are the boys going to do? They're going to play video games. And that doesn't hurt anybody. But the girls are going to use it to amplify the social interactions. So this is Twenge's explanation. I think it makes a lot of sense. So it's a catastrophe, it's a crisis, and we're really hurting, especially the girls. So we've got to change something about that. Anyway, but social media is possibly the largest single reason why things are going haywire on campus. The third big factor.
And do you think it's primarily Facebook, or can you tell?
Well, the kids use a lot of different platforms, but from what I hear, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. Again, the thing is, it's one to many. That's what's bad. It's anything. If it's you put something out there and you see how many people like it, that's what's bad.
Right, and there's always the threat that it'll go viral in a terrible way. So that's like
right.
a hammer.
Exactly.
There's a sword of Damocles over your head.
That's perfect.
Unlimited damage.
Unlimited downside to saying something. So what do you do? So they're all careful.
Right.
So I don't know if I want to like that post because, you know, I could get in big trouble for it.
Right. Well, the benefit to liking it is minimal, and the potential catastrophe for discipline.
Unless you're expected to like it, in which case you better like it because if you don't like it, you'll get in trouble. So it's a much more of a mob mentality. Kids are afraid. You know, I'm not blaming the kids. I'm very sympathetic to them. These are my kids. My kids are 11 and 7. They're going to come up into this. So the kids have been raised in a social environment that's much more about mob formation and mob attacks and and defenses against mobs. And then the third factor then is the political polarization and the purification of our institutions. So if you imagine coming up in the 90s, when political polarization is going up, we're beginning to hate each other more across party lines, but it's not that hard, not that nasty. But it's been getting much, much more hostile. So that now, if someone goes to a campus Republicans meeting, if it's a Democrat who goes to a meeting of the campus Republicans, as happened at UC Santa Cruz a couple weeks ago, and someone finds out, so the hatred, the cross-party hatred, is so much stronger now, and many of our institutions are much purer. So if you went to college in the 90s, there might have been a few conservative professors around, but now there aren't. So as you said before, it's like exposure therapy. If you've never encountered a conservative idea, and then a conservative like Heather McDonald comes to speak on your campus, well, this is like a major immune response problem. We've got to get the tribe together and mob her and shut her down. So those are there are many other reasons, but the loss of unsupervised play, social media, and rising polarization. Those are the three big ones.
Right. Well, those are big problems, especially the loss of unsupervised play. It's not obvious at all how that might be addressed.
Yes, it is.
Okay, good.
Everyone
I'd like to hear
should
about
buy.
that.
Everyone should just buy Lenore Skenazy's book, Free Range Kids, and then they should loosen up and give their kids more unsupervised time. Now, you can't do this alone. You'll be arrested.
Yeah.
I tried to get my son to go out across the street to, buy groceries when he was, 9 years old.
Yeah.
And he'd say, but, Daddy, people look at me funny. There are no other kids out there. And so Lenore has started a fantastic organization called Let Grow. So if viewers go to letgrow.org.
Okay, we'll put all this in the description, all of these things.
Great. So I'm on the board of it, and as an advisor, Peter Gray, an expert on play, is on the board. And they're doing these simple things, simple things, like you convince a school to just open up the playground an hour early, or keep it open after school. Why should kids always have organized activities and soccer practice? Just give them a place to play where there's a nurse available if someone gets hurt. There is an adult, but he's not supervising. He's just over there.
Right.
So don't worry, parents. There is an adult. But beyond that, kids do what they want. And they just started this a few weeks ago, and the results are fantastic. The kids are having so much fun. They are becoming more independent. They're more willing to do projects on their own. It's working out great. So
that's
you
really good.
can't do this on your own, but the thing is, we all know something's wrong.
So those are very practical. That's a very practical piece of advice for schools. It's like open up the unsupervised play facilities and facilitate their use.
That's right. Give everyone a place which is safe, and by safe, I mean physically safe.
Right.
Never use the word safety to describe emotions and ideas. Safety means physical safety. So you got to provide a physically safe place for the kids to play, and beyond that, you let them go. Now, there will arise problems of bullying. So if it's repeated harassment,
Well, I know a book about that.
What book?
It's by Dan Olweus, called Bullying, What We Know and What We Can Do About It. And it was written, it's got to be 30 years ago. And Olweus cut the incidence of bullying in the Scandinavian countries down by 50%. And he really targets what bullying means. So he's not a safe space guy by any stretch of the imagination.
I don't know what the origins of it are. I know that evaluations of his program in America show anywhere from 0 to 20% reductions in bullying.
Yeah, well,
so the effects are much smaller.
In the U.S.
In the U.S., yeah.
Yeah, the question is whether or not they were able to implement them with the rigor he did in the U.S.
Okay. But bullying programs are part of the problem, because bullying clearly is a problem. We need to do something about it. But because we have what's called concept creep.
Yeah.
And so it's now gotten to the point.
I can imagine what concept creep looks like even.
Yeah, that's right. So now it's the case that if kids don't invite, if some kids want to do something and they don't invite another kid, they've excluded that kid.
Right.
Well, that could be bullying.
Right. I've read of schools in Europe that don't allow kids to have best friends for exactly that reason. Yeah, well, because this is also something that really bothers me about the misuse of the IAT. Because it's not that easy to distinguish in-group preference, which no one in their right mind would want to eliminate in-group preference, given that it governs your choice of mate and your behavior towards your family members, let's say. To distinguish that between out-group exclusion is no simple matter. And to tell kids that they can't have a best friend is another thing that interferes with an important part of their
That's right.
development.
Yeah, I think both of us have spent a lot of time looking at ancient wisdom, at the writings of people long ago. And I often come back to Aristotle's claim that any virtue carried to extremes becomes a vice. So inclusion is a good thing. If people are being excluded because they have a physical stigma, or they're overweight, or their skin color. So we need to be looking at the reasons why kids are excluded. But if you say inclusion is the primary virtue, inclusion over everything else. And so if those two best friends are excluding others, no more best friends.
Right.
This is madness.
Yeah.
This is a vice. So I think that inclusion, again, it's a virtue unless it's carried to extremes.
Well, that's probably a pretty good place to stop, I would say, unless do you have anything else that you wanted to talk about? We talked about the role of religion and the fact that people are naturally religious thinkers.
Yep,
we talked about the Heterodox Academy. We talked about your work on Disgust and your plans for the Academy. You talked about your books. Is there anything else that might be of interest that you can think of?
Let's see. Just that, I'll just say that I'm actually optimistic about what's going to happen on campus. I think things might continue to get worse this year, but I think there's an interesting phenomenon called preference falsification. When you have people not speaking honestly, as you had under communism, when you have a whole system where almost everybody thinks this is terrible, I hate this, but I don't dare say anything. When you have preference falsification, this is work by Timur Kuran, and everybody hears everybody else's preferences, so they think, okay, that's what everybody thinks. When you have an unraveling, it can unravel very quickly. And that's what happened in the communist countries, because everybody hated it. And it fell amazingly quickly. And I think the pushback at Reed last week, or that was written up last week. So I think because most people, what we're starting to see is that a lot of people of color also say, you're not speaking for me. I mean, every group is diverse. And so when you have a variety of people, and you have progressive speaking, you have a variety of people, I think we're going to see more and more people standing up saying, wait, what's happening is this is not right, this is illiberal, this is opposed to the values of the Academy, this is not what I want for myself or my kids or my students. So I do think that we're going to start seeing a lot more people standing up. And one of our goals at Heterodox Academy is to just help put out the ideas that people need. And this is what you're doing too. Just put out the ideas, critique the bad ideas, and put out concepts that can contest in the space of ideas. Get good information. So if people go to heterodoxacademy.org, on our research pages, we have all the information about what do all the polls say, what's the current information about students' attitudes. We have the history of this. We have a lot of research on who is more biased, left or right. Well, it turns out both sides are about equally biased. So we think that by just doing what we actually do well as academics, that is research, making arguments, being calm and civil, we actually think that we can turn this around. So if anybody watching this is a professor, I would invite you to join. Go to heterodoxacademy.org and sign up. Okay,
so let me ask you one more question. I mean, that sounds good, and it's good to hear that you're optimistic. I mean, I waver. Although I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic, I just think we're in one of those situations where things could spiral in either direction very rapidly, and that worries me. What about the disciplines on campus that seem to be primarily devoted to the activist cause? Because my view is, or my fear is, that we've subsidized the activist disciplines. Let's say women's studies as a good example, but we could say social work and then the faculties of education now as well. I think they're in the same bin, let's put it that way. The women's studies programs in particular, their express goal, expressed on their websites, is to produce social justice, radical left-leaning activists. And so, for a while, one of the things I proposed in Canada was that the Conservatives, in particular, cut the university funding by 25% so that the universities would have to sort themselves out. But then that was a provocative claim, obviously. But then I thought, well, that's not a good idea because it opens up the door to political interference in the academy, and that's bad.
That's
conservative and
right.
left.
No, that's right.
But the academy's done a very bad job of policing itself methodologically. And we have these disciplines. Women's studies, I think, is a prime example, and that's been very much criticized in Canada by Janice Fiamenko, who used to be, yeah, she is, and she's not in her natural milieu when she's doing such things. You know, she's a brave and tough person, and she's gone after the women's studies types on methodological grounds, particularly. But there are people who are working full time at doing nothing but producing the kind of polar. So, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, I do. I think so. Here I teach in the business school here, and I teach a course called Professional Responsibility, and I teach my students about their fiduciary duties, their duties to their employers, the duties that we have to each other. And fiduciary duty refers to a very, very high standard of care. If you're managing someone's money, you know, you really have to be committed to doing what's in their interest, not in your interest. And I think we need that concept in the academy. We have, I'm not sure if we call it fiduciary duties or just professional duties, but I think we have two primary professional duties that we must never, never betray. One, the most important one in our role as scholars, is our duty to the truth. We must never say things that we think are false or allow people to say things that we think are false because we're afraid if we challenge them, we'll get in trouble. So we have a fiduciary duty to the truth. And political, ideological commitments clearly warp us. They make us do things. They push us. So we've got to recognize that if we let our systems get out of whack, we are betraying the truth. We are systemically, we have a systemic truthism problem. We are systemically betraying the truth in many of our disciplines. So I think we need an awareness of that, and we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Then in our role as teachers, we have, and here we really can call it a fiduciary duty. These are people's children who are sent to us to educate, to enlarge their minds, to teach them skills. If we were to use them for our sexual pleasure, it's obviously a horrific crime. But what is it if we use them for our ideological purposes? If we say, you've given me your children to educate, I'm waging a political battle, I'm going to try to get
use them as tools.
Use them as tools. That is horrific. That is unacceptable. We are violating our duties. So I think we need
right, but the response to that, especially from the postmodernist types, is that that's all there is. There's only ideological conflict.
Well, that's right. Perfect. So back to your original question, are there problem departments? Absolutely. So I wanted to put forth these two commitments, to truth and to educating, not indoctrinating. Yeah. And universities that embrace these highest goals, like the University of Chicago, I think is the best candidate, will probably find that they need to do something about departments that don't live up to those goals. Other universities, and I think Brown is leading the way on this one so far. I mean, early in 2015, the president had all kinds of statements about Brown is committed to social justice, a bedrock commitment to social justice, she said. So if some universities choose to devote themselves to social justice, that's fine. Just be upfront about it. Say so. So students will know. If you want social justice training, you go to Brown. But if you want to actually be trained to find the truth, to do research, you go to Chicago. And I think we're going to see people flooding to Chicago and schools like it. So what I'm hoping.
So that's the mechanism there. If they make their statements public, that the choice of the students will be to go to the universities that hold the principles that you just described over the other ones. It'll be a marketplace choice.
Exactly. That's right. So that's why I said when I talked about the emperor's new clothes, we have a situation, we have a gigantic market failure in which our top universities are offering a product that most consumers don't want. Right. And so my prediction is that Chicago is going to see a huge surge of applications this year. And if that's true, I think other universities are going to follow suit. They're going to take notice. So I'm hoping that we'll see a schism in the American academy between those universities that stand up and say, this is madness, we are committed to providing a platform, we don't discriminate based on viewpoint and politics, that's the Chicago way. And those that say, no, we're about social justice, come here and we will train you to fight for social justice and against the right. So if people have clear choices, then I think we're going to see a big change. And that's why I'm optimistic, because I think we're going to see that.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It was great talking with you. So.